This is Research Like a Pro, episode 28, Using DNA to Research Like a Pro. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist's Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Nicole Dyer, co-host of the Research Like a Pro Genealogy podcast. I'm here with accredited genealogist Diana Elder. Today, we are talking about using DNA as we research like a pro. So we are both in the middle of client projects where we are using DNA evidence to prove a conclusion. So we're in the middle of doing this ourselves, and today we want to just talk about how we research like a pro with DNA. So hi, Diana, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm really excited to talk about this today. DNA is just taking the genealogy world by storm and has for the last few years, but I'm seeing that more and more people don't know what to do with it. And we are all struggling to try to figure out the best way to use it in our research. So we have some fun ideas today for everyone about how to tackle a project using DNA. So I'm excited to share that.
Before we start, let's do a review from one of our listeners named Arnaud. He says, the friendly yet professional manner in which the information is presented is refreshing. I especially like the conversations between Diana and Nicole about the way each of them do genealogy. You are my favorite genealogy podcast. Wow, that's so nice. Thank you so much. And we certainly enjoy recording the episodes. And sometimes we're even talking before the episode starts about certain things that we're doing. And I think to myself, oh, we really should be recording our pre-podcast conversations too, because that's just what we like to talk about. So it's our natural thing.
It is. We are a couple of genealogy nerds, and we will just wear that. We are totally fine with being known as that. So we love research and genealogy, and we love teaching. So this is a super fun platform for us to be able to share everything we've learned with all of you listening. So for our announcements for the day, we are beginning the Research Like a Pro mini challenge tomorrow on January 22nd, and we are super excited about this. So this is how it's going to work. If you sign up for the challenge, you will get a daily email with what you're supposed to do. And we're going to take the process and give you 2 days to do each step. We are encouraging you to do something simple, a mini objective. This is not the time to tackle finding your brick wall, your great-great-great-grandmother's parents. That's going to take more time. This is supposed to teach you the process in a small amount of time. So we will be giving you some really good ideas if you decide to sign up about what kind of objectives would work the best. And then if you'd like to, you can post your progress on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then you can tag us at Family Locket and use the hashtag ResearchLikeAPro. Nicole and I will be sharing our progress daily on social media, and you'll be able to follow us and see what we're doing too. So it's going to be super fun. If you want to do that, you can sign up at FamilyLocket.com/challenge. So we're really hoping a lot of you who've maybe been thinking you'd like to try this, that you'll dive in and do this just 14 days, working from like 30 minutes a day, and see what you can find and see what you can learn about the research process.
Right. Yeah, I'm excited to do it along with everybody and get that little bit of research in every day. I think even if you can only spend 10 or 15 minutes a day, you can still learn the process and make progress. You just will need to choose a very simple objective. So diving into today's subject, let's talk about the Research Like a Pro process and DNA evidence. So when we use DNA evidence in genealogy, we can't just use it on its own. We have to blend traditional research with the DNA results to be able to prove our hypotheses. We have to use documentary evidence along with the scientific DNA evidence. It can't just be all by itself, that DNA evidence. So that I think can be difficult to do both halves of the research. But when we do, I think it opens up a huge amount of new evidence that can help us with clues and providing us ideas for possible relationships to discover and prove. So it is an exciting, but can be more difficult method.
Right. And for today's podcast, we're going to be using a research project that I actually did a long time ago. And this was back when research with DNA was just beginning. And to give you a little bit of backstory, Nicole and I started researching our family in 2003 when my dad gave me all of his papers in a suitcase. And for some reason, I got going on the Royston family. I think all of us have certain families that become our babies, and that's the line that we just keep working on. And for me, it was this Royston line. I just kept working on it and working on it. And I had found Roystons in Virginia in 1600 and 1700. And I had started putting together all of this family tree stuff that I found in books up at the Family History Library. And then I posted my tree on RootsWeb. Back then, that's what you did because ancestry trees weren't a thing yet. And I started having cousins contact me. And I had a couple of cousins contact me, Royston researchers, and they said, well, how are you related? And would you like to be part of a Y-DNA project to see if your line is connected to ours? My Royston line, my ancestor had come out to Texas and then gone on to California. And these researchers, their lines had stayed back east. They were in Virginia, had kind of moved around in that area. And I don't think that they really were sure that my research was all that good and that I really connected to them, because there was also a Maryland Royston family, completely unrelated. So I think before they wanted to invite me to join their Royston research group, they wanted to see if I actually connected to the family. So they invited me to use Y-DNA, and I had to find a male direct descendant of the Royston line. And I called my dad, and of course he couldn't do it because his surname is Schultz. He's through Dora Algie Royston. She's a female. It's not going to work with Y-DNA testing, but he had a cousin still living at the time, and he lived in California. He was an elderly cousin with the surname of Royston, and my dad called him and said, would you mind swabbing your cheek for this DNA test? And our Royston cousin did, and it was so exciting. This was back before Family Tree DNA was doing the Y-DNA testing, and it was through Sorensen Labs. And then we waited and waited and waited to get the results, and it was really exciting when we got the results that he matched 100% with one of the other Roystons who was out of the Virginia line, and I think 97% with another one. So that opened up so much for me, because then they welcomed me into the research group. They knew that my line was connected, and it was a fun introduction to DNA testing. And then years later, fast forward a few years, and I was working on my 4th-generation accreditation project. And guess which project I used? Of course, it was the Royston family, because I'd done so much work getting these 4 generations together. And I knew I needed to use that Y-DNA, because quite honestly, it was kind of like the glue that held everything together, especially my 3rd to 4th generations. That's all I kind of had. I really needed that DNA evidence. And so then I needed to learn how to write up DNA evidence, how to create source citations for it, how to use my research log to show the research with the DNA. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was really using all the Research Like a Pro steps in putting my DNA into that research project. So that is what we're going to talk about today, each step of the Research Like a Pro process and how it can apply to working with our DNA results.
Okay, well, obviously, we know the very first step is choosing a research objective. So when you're working with DNA, you still need to have an objective. You may have a question, you may have a brick wall that can be answered with DNA evidence. So consider, is there a brick wall ancestor where DNA could help identify the parents? Is there a line that needs to be confirmed where you've done the research, you have a guess, but you don't have all direct evidence? You want to confirm it through DNA? As genealogists, we have a lot of these kinds of questions, so maybe it's hard to identify just one. But once you've chosen a brick wall ancestor or a line that you want to verify with DNA, then you can form your specific research objective using the key identifiers, the specific names, dates, and places. So here is an example of a research project objective that includes DNA. The objective of this research project is to confirm John Cary Royston as the father of Thomas Beverly Royston through Y-DNA testing. John Cary Royston was born about 1750 in Virginia and died after 1814 in Georgia. John married Mary Polly Baker Cessna, 6 January 1803 in Greene County, Georgia. Thomas Beverly Royston was born about 1806 in Greene County, Georgia, and died 21 September 1867 in Chambers County, Alabama. Thomas married Cynthia Dillard about 1833 in Georgia or Alabama. So after writing out a whole objective like that with all of the key identifiers, you're all set to go forward and analyze your sources, which is the next step.
Okay, so I think that we all realize that we have to use DNA with traditional genealogy research. So the more we have gathered in the source documents and we've analyzed those, we put those in our timeline, we really have a solid background with our traditional genealogy research, the more success we're going to have proving connections through DNA. So once you have created your objective and you've figured out what you're going to be doing for this research project, you'll want to do that traditional analyze your evidence. You'll want to put all the sources about your ancestor into a timeline, analyze each one for new clues. You're going to make a really clear picture of your ancestor's lifetime, and that will help you make connections. Now, as you are doing this traditional part of your genealogy research, you're going to remember that DNA is a source as well. And you'll have to figure out a way to analyze and organize your DNA matches. Here are some ideas of some things that I have done or I have seen other people do, or I watch a lot of webinars about DNA. But you can create a spreadsheet of your surname matches, and you can view your matches trees for close matches and try to put those into the spreadsheet. You can sort your matches into genetic networks. You could use mind mapping. So each project is going to be a little different in the way you analyze the DNA information. But remember that step 2 of the Research Like a Pro process with analyzing your sources, you're going to have to figure out how you will analyze your DNA results. So we're going to have in the show notes a lot of resources for learning how to analyze DNA results. Every single day, it seems like there is someone else that's come up with a great idea for how to organize and analyze. And so we are learning right along with all of our listeners out there, anybody else who's working with DNA, trying to figure out the best process for each method. But just know doing some analysis is necessary to get you to your goal. So let's talk about my example. How did I analyze the Y-DNA results that I got for the Royston research project? So when I was working on this project, I did the first step. I thoroughly revisited all of the documentary evidence, figured out every single source that I'd ever found, had to do a little bit more research to nail down some other sources. And then I had to address the DNA. And because this is Y-DNA, it showed that I matched these other Royston individuals. But guess what I needed to do? I needed to look at their trees and see how good the Royston links were for them going back to our common ancestor. And so I had to independently verify that information. And that is something that we all are going to need to do. If we match someone, that's why we look at their tree. We look to see how we match, and we look to see how good the research is going back on their lines. So analyzing our own sources, analyzing the trees of our matches, as well as analyzing our matches. There's a lot of analysis in this step, which might be overwhelming, but we are getting more and more help with doing that. So once I had looked at the Y-DNA Royston matches, I clearly saw how their descendancy went from the common ancestor, and I was able to finally say, okay, this is 100% the correct ancestor. We all connect back to this John Royston who appeared in 1621 in Virginia. So it was really great looking at their trees and analyzing everything and figuring out our connections.
So you might spend a lot of time in that analysis phase if you're going to have to analyze not only your own tree, but the trees of all these other people that you're trying to connect with.
Yeah, that's why DNA is a lengthy process. The good thing, though, is if people have put a tree on Ancestry, then that helps because you don't have to build it. And then we all know that sometimes you have to build their tree for them because a lot of people are testing with DNA and they don't have a tree. They are not genealogists. They just think it's fun to do the testing and see what their ethnicity is. So sometimes we have to build their trees for them.
Okay, so that's a really important tip that I don't think everybody is aware of, that if you come across a DNA match who doesn't have a tree, you can build a tree for them using your own software or Ancestry. And then all you really have to do is ask that person for the names of their grandparents or great grandparents and then go from there. And then you can just build up their tree. And then they don't have to try to find out all the answers that you're looking for. They can just tell you what they know, and then you can go build their tree. And then you can even let them know, I want to build your tree for you to find out how we're related, and I'll give it back to you when I'm done with it so that you can have the results of what I find. And that might be the way that you get some of those cousins to respond who otherwise may not respond because they just get plenty of emails from cousin matches and they don't really want to respond to all of them.
Right. That's a great point. And I'll just mention really quick, we should do a whole episode on how I found my sister. She's an adoptee, how I found her biological father last summer. But I did have to build a couple trees because I knew her mother and we had a DNA match on her mother's side. I was able to eliminate all those matches and just look at paternal matches. And they separated pretty easily into two family groups because she's 25% Finnish. But I had to build a tree for each of those separate groups. And I just put those on Ancestry. I started an Ancestry tree. You can have as many trees on Ancestry as you want. And I started looking for common ancestors of these matches. And I had two trees. It was really pretty fun and pretty easy because what happens when you start building a tree on Ancestry, you start getting all these record hints. And your tree sometimes can build pretty quickly once you get back far enough. So just know that's part of the process, part of the analysis is figuring out how you connect with your matches.
All right. So after analysis, the next Research Like a Pro step is to do locality research. So what we have kind of equated this with in a DNA project is learning more about DNA. So traditional genealogy research, we have to know a lot about the locality where the ancestor lived. So we learn about record collections, boundary changes, jurisdictions, and so forth. And creating a locality guide is really helpful when we're doing traditional genealogy research. But what can we do when we're doing a DNA evidence project? One idea is to create a personal DNA reference guide to really help you become more of an expert in understanding DNA as evidence in genealogy. So because this is a relatively new field in genealogy, the majority of the information about using DNA for genealogy is online and can be scattered among different websites and blogs. So it might be a good idea to just take all the articles that you're learning from and put them all into a document, your own DNA reference guide that has information that helps you and guides you and that you need to have to reference in the future. So, how should you start? Well, Diana says that you should invest in a good DNA book or two because she has done that. I have one DNA book, but I haven't really worked through it yet, but it's nice to have that reference. My preference is to watch webinars and read blog posts. So, whatever works for you, get a book if you like books, maybe watch some webinars, read blog posts. I know Blaine Bettinger has his membership program now that you can join and get his videos, his webinars. So just start learning and get a good understanding of DNA and the certain kind of DNA that you will be using. Like if you're doing a Y DNA project, then you're going to want to learn everything you can about y-DNA and make a reference guide about that. If you're doing a mitochondrial DNA project, then get all the information you can about that kind of DNA evidence and what you're going to need to do to analyze that. So that's our recommendation for the locality guide step. Turn it into a DNA reference guide instead.
And if any of you listening are like me, I have to teach it to somebody else to really internalize it, because sometimes I can watch a webinar, I can hear a talk, or I can read something, and it just doesn't click as well with me until I write it myself or I tell it to someone. So this whole idea of putting it into your reference guide and actually typing it out, maybe there's something that helps our brains connect when we do that ourselves. It helps us to learn it. And so when I was doing my Royston Y-DNA project, there wasn't very much online about this. There were a few articles and things, and I was able to glean the basics of how the Y chromosome was inherited from father to son. So I had to learn how to do this because I had to explain it to my dad, who was financing the project for one thing, and getting his cousin involved. And it was so funny because my dad really thought that we were going to be exhuming a grave in Virginia to prove the DNA. He was really glad to understand how it worked better. But I had to understand it completely myself before I could explain it to him. So if you're struggling to understand it, try that. Try learning about it, try explaining it to someone else, try writing it down in your reference guide so that it becomes pretty clear in your head how the DNA inheritance works. Now, one thing that I really love doing, if you've listened to my podcast on organizing, you know that I love Evernote, and I created an entire DNA notebook in Evernote. So whenever I go to a class on DNA, that syllabus information goes in that notebook. If I find a great chart online, that goes in my Evernote notebook on DNA, and that also holds my DNA reference guide. That's been really helpful for me because I can tag all of my different Evernote notes. So I can tag it with people, like Blaine Bettinger or Angie Bush or some of these, Diane Southers, some of these experts in the field. I can think, I remember I listened to a great webinar, and I can find it quickly using my tags. And so for me, Evernote works really, really great. But you'll want to have some way where you are keeping this information, the stuff that resonates with you, in a good place. Because otherwise, we can do Google searches all we want, but then we have to wade through all the hits. And so if you find something good, save it to Google Drive, save it to OneNote, do whatever you do to save and create your own reference guide on DNA. Now, what's the next step? So far, we've got create an objective, analyze your sources, do a reference guide. So now we have to plan. This is what we do next in the Research Like a Pro process. So we've gathered our sources. We've learned about the possibilities for DNA testing. We know all about the Y-DNA, the autosomal, the mitochondrial DNA. Now we have to think about how we can use that in making our research plan. Hopefully you've kind of figured out through doing your reference guide, doing your education, you've figured out what tests would be most helpful. Are you going to want to do a Y-DNA? Is it a paternal line, where there could be an inheritance pattern of father to son? Or are you just going to need to do a whole bunch of cousins because it's an autosomal test that would work best? And do you know which cousins would work best? So you have to do a targeted testing plan. It's what we call it in the genetic genealogy world. And you have to think who would be the best people to test and what kind of tests would be most helpful. So I've talked a little bit about my Royston project, and we had to target the elderly cousin who was an unbroken line of Roystons and have him test. I couldn't have, had my dad test because he didn't work. I had to have the right person. So you're going to have to know who could have inherited the DNA for the test you're using, and then you've got to target those people. So you may have discovered once you're doing your source analysis that there's some traditional research. Maybe you figured out some other things that you could go searching for besides DNA. And so you'll want to add that to your research plan as well, because DNA is just one part of our evidence, and it has to always be used with the documentary evidence. So one thing you can do is once you've got your testing, you sent out your DNA kits to your cousins or whoever's going to be helping you do the testing while you're waiting for results to come back, you can tackle your traditional genealogy research. And as part of your research plan, you could work on shoring up all your research that you think, you've created a hypothesis. You could try to shore up that reasoning. So with my Royston plan, I identified my elderly cousin, and then we found the results. And then I also accompanied that with a bunch of other documentary evidence. It all worked together.
All right, so this might seem very different, but when we cite DNA sources, we still have to create a citation. So let's talk about how to create a source citation with DNA being the source. So the first thing to do is to really recognize, what are you citing? Are you citing a DNA test results report? Are you citing a cousin match on a DNA website? What are you citing? Often you're going to be citing a cousin match on a DNA website. So maybe you're on ancestry.com and you see a cousin match. So that result is what you're going to be citing. So let's talk about each of the parts of a citation. So who created the source? So if it's a website that you're looking at, then that's who created it. So Ancestry. Or if you are using a report, then it could be the author of the report detailing the DNA results. Okay, then what is the source? So I already kind of talked about that, but this could be the title of the database or the title of the tool, like if you're using GenMatch, or it could be the title of the DNA report. So what is the source? Consider what the title of that database or thing is. If it's an ancestry website, you could put that the title of that database is the cousin matches of, and then whoever is the test taker. Then when was the source created? You'll want to include the date the website was accessed, or if you're doing a report, a DNA test results report, the date the report was created. Then where is the source? You'll want to put the URL of the website that you have the cousin match on, or the address of the individual who the report was created for, if you're using that report. And then where within is the source? So this is tricky because in order to access the DNA result that you are looking at, other people would have to sign in with a specific login and password. So you don't share that in the citation. Instead, you're going to give specific details about the DNA results, such as which chromosome you match on, or the matching kit numbers, or how many CCMs you're sharing, if that's all that you can get from the ancestry results. So it's probably best to include the specific chromosomes that you're matching on. But if you can't get that or you don't use GenMatch, then try to think of some other information like the number of shared CCMs across how many chromosomes, like what Ancestry tells you. Before I ask Diana for her thoughts about citations, we just want to mention that there is a really great resource that Elizabeth Schoen Mills created called the Quick Sheet for Citing Genetic Sources in Genealogy. The actual title is Quick Sheet Citing Genetic Sources for History Research Evidence Style. So if you want to see how Elizabeth Schoen Mills would cite a DNA source, then you can get this quick sheet. And we'll put a link to Amazon in the show notes for you to purchase that. But it's just a small little laminated pamphlet that you can buy for $10, and it will give you all the information that you need to be able to cite your DNA sources. So Diana, what do you think about citing DNA evidence?
Well, when I was doing my 4-generation report for accreditation, I had to figure out how to do citations. And so I'm just going to read a couple of mine because this is what I came up with. So the first one that I did was a report. So you'll remember that once we had our Y-DNA results, I gave that to one of the other Royston test takers, and he formulated a report for that and sent it back to me. And so for my research report, I had his name first. I will leave his first name off for privacy's sake, but his name. And then the title was The Results of the 46 Marker DNA Male Y Chromosome Test. Then I had the date. It was 24 October 2009, and it was revised 21 June 2010. The report was prepared for me and privately held by me in 2017. So I had to just formulate using the who, what, where, whatever, all the different steps. And so anybody reading my report, they could see clearly what the name of the test was, who created the report, the year that it was done, where they could get a hold of that report. So, I think that using the steps to create a source citation really guides us and really helps us. I also included in my report some background information on the Y-DNA test and cited a website in a book. So I cited the IZOG website, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy Wiki. I cited one of their articles about Y-DNA testing, and then I also cited Blaine Bettinger and Debbie Parker Wayne, a section of their book. So I used some background information in my report and then the actual report for my 4-generation accreditation report. So source citations, it is a little bit different using your DNA, but it's really important because we've got to show how we are proving this DNA findings.
I know I've created a couple citations using DNA evidence, and I know you have some too. Why don't we create a simple sheet with some sample citations for our listeners for them to download as a free little cheat sheet about DNA citations, just some that we've already created in the past?
That's great. And we'll also put in there the ideas for how to create a citation with DNA using the who, what, when,
Okay.
where is, where, within method. Some of the ideas that could be. Good idea, Nicole. So we are almost to the end of the Research Like a Pro process. We now are to the step where we have to keep a research log. And so what do we do with a research log and DNA? Hopefully you're going to learn, if you haven't tried the process yet, that the research log is our workhorse. This is where we keep everything. I love my research logs. So with DNA in mind, this is where you can track your cousin matches. You can use spreadsheets for analyzing, but you can also use your spreadsheets, your research log, to keep track of all of this information that you're doing as part of your DNA work. So let's say that you have corresponded with several test takers. You've got these different people targeted and they're taking the test. Each of them could have a line in your research log with their contact information and how many centimorgans they matched you with, specifics. So the more you can actually get into your research log, the more information, the more organized you can be, the better off you're going to be. So I like to use multiple pages in a research log. You could have a page for your ancestry DNA matches. You could have a page for your GEDmatch results. You could have several different pages in your research log for showing the work that you've done on your DNA. So you'll just need to experiment with tracking your DNA research until you find the system that works the very, very best for you. And the blog post that I originally wrote talking about this does have an image of my 4-generation report research log where I put in my DNA information. And so we'll have a link to that blog post in the show notes, and you can go take a look at the little snapshot of how I use DNA in my research log.
Well, the last and most important culminating step of your DNA research project is to write up your results. So whether you write a short note in your genealogy software or a full research report, it's the best way to make sense of what you've found and to remember what you reasoned and the conclusions that you came to. So don't forget to do this. And you can even use charts, diagrams, tables to help explain relationships. This can be really helpful when you're doing DNA reporting. So be sure to also include future research suggestions because there's always more that we can do, especially when more cousins are testing all the time. So you may need to identify additional individuals to take a test or other sources to search for traditional genealogy evidence or more trees to create for possible matches and that kind of thing. So don't forget that important part of your report, the future research suggestions.
Right. And I'm just going to read my conclusion after I had written my report on the Royston that using the DNA. I had a little paragraph here about how I put into words what I had found. So this is what I said. DNA testing has become an important genealogical tool with the Y chromosome DNA test used to compare direct paternal line ancestry. Genetic genealogist Blaine Bettinger and Debbie Wayne explain, quote, Because each man's Y chromosome is nearly identical to the Y chromosome that his many great-grandfather possessed, the Y DNA line can be traced back very far, end quote. Since only males carry the Y chromosome, Dora's nephew was tested, and his Y chromosome DNA matched that of other Royston men, proved to have descended from Thomas Royston, born 1610 of Virginia. The Y DNA test results gave additional credence to the research linking the 4 generations of Roystons. So that was my simple little conclusion about how the Y DNA showed that I was connecting my line back to the Virginia ancestor. So you'll want to think of some way to write it up. And again, when you write it up, that's when it really makes sense in your brain and you really see clearly what you have in front of you. Now, just the final thought as we close up this episode is DNA ethics and privacy rights. There's been a lot written about this lately, but remember that it's really important to get permission if you're going to write a report from the names of your testers. And if they don't give permission to have their name in it, then you'll have to think of another way to identify them. So anytime anyone is giving you rights to their DNA, make sure you have that permission, probably in writing would be the very best thing. If they don't permit you to use it in, say, you're doing a graphic like a mind mapping or you're doing a table, then you'll just need to use an alternate name for them. If you are taking a picture of matches, like say your ancestry matches on the computer, doing a screenshot of that, you'll have to block out their names if they haven't given you permission. Just always think about that idea of privacy, that not everybody wants to have their name up there identified as a DNA match with you. And then if you are getting DNA from people who have agreed to take the test, make sure that you explain the ramifications of testing. They have to know that DNA testing could pull up something unexpected in their background. You know, you don't want to have somebody test and then they find out their father's not their father. You want to make sure that they know that there could be surprises like that in their family history and that they are prepared for that. And you might want to ask them point blank, if I find something that is surprising, do you even want to know about it? And then you've given them a choice. So just some things to think about. We're so excited about DNA, but then there's another side to it that we have to really consider, and that is the ethics and privacy of individuals who have tested and that we are asking to test. So with that, I think that we are about done to wrap up this episode on DNA and the Research Like a Pro process. Nicole, do you have any final thoughts?
Looking forward to my client project about DNA and the Johnson family. It's a common surname, so we are hoping that using the DNA evidence will reveal more clues than we can with traditional genealogy research. So I'll have to keep you updated on what we find out.
Oh yeah, that's going to be so fun. I think this is going to be a big spring DNA client project time for us, because I have 2 projects coming up in March and April that are all based on DNA. So we're going to be honing our skills on DNA, and we'll be sharing things that we've learned and processes we've learned all along the way. So we're excited for that, because really the best way to learn this stuff is by doing it.
All right, now don't forget that tomorrow we are starting our Research Like a Pro 14-day mini challenge. So we hope that all of you guys will join us. We are just going to be sending you an email every day with a small task that you can do to help you learn the Research Like a Pro process. So be sure to choose a simple objective to maybe identify an ancestor that you already know something about. Maybe they were born between 1890 and 1910, so that it will be an easy project so that you can really focus on learning the process of researching like a pro. So sign up at our website, familylocket.com/challenge, to join our 14-day mini Research Like a Pro challenge. So we'll see you soon and talk to you next week.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Research Like a Pro with Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional, and Nicole Dyer. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your own genealogy research. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or visit our website, familylocket.com, to contact us. You can find our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.